Good morning. That was so nice. Thank you, guys. For those of you who don't know who I am, though we are dressed the same, I'm not Dan. I am Cody, and I'm part of the team here at the Alliance, and I'm just so glad to be with you here today. We're in our series called Here and There, and last week we talked about the inseparable mission, where we were left thinking about three things. It was praying for workers, it was getting uncomfortable, and it was not relying on our own provision, but on God's. This week, we're talking about the what of mission. And as I was just preparing and thinking further about what that really meant, an episode of my favorite show actually came to mind. And so to set up the episode, there's this boss who goes into a class at a more impoverished school, and he makes this promise to these kids that if they can complete high school, he would pay for their college. Now, when we think about that, it's just, it's so great. I know I got really inspired. It's like, wow, man, the heart of somebody to be able to do that. And as the episode continues on, you see this building of tension within this boss, and it's kind of unsettling. Like, for me, oh my goodness, you said this really cool thing, yet it's almost like a fear of re-encountering these students. We find out later in the episode that as graduation day is approaching, this boss gets to go back and see the class. He gets to talk with them. They're so excited to see him. They're so excited to share with him all the accomplishments that they've done, which again makes me feel just so good. And then he lays it on them that he, in fact, will not be paying for any of their college because he just doesn't have the money. And instead, he offers them computer batteries for computers they don't actually have. And so for me, it's like this roller coaster of a journey of, wow, that's so inspiring, I think that's so great, into, oh my goodness, that was kind of cringy and hard to watch. But what it did do is this episode told a story enough to where I was engaged, I was paying attention to it, and I actually wanted more. And I'm willing to bet when it comes to telling stories or hearing stories, I'm not the only one who gets engaged by that. In fact, according to Forbes, in 2021, the entertainment market, so that's home and mobile, that could be your digital, that could be your streaming, that could even be theatrical, the entertainment market totaled $36.8 billion just in the United States alone. So that tells me right there that I'm not the only one. And in fact, we as a culture and as a society actually really thrive off of this idea and concept of story. In fact, in many ways, before there was the internet, before there was telephones, families would just pass story and story down from generation to generation. It was our way of communicating what had happened. It was our way of, in some ways also just being entertained. But what I found is story in itself, the delivery is really important. So how many of you guys have heard a story where it almost felt like somebody was just preaching at you or like almost just teaching over and over and over again? It's kind of hard to receive that, right? Especially if it feels like you're being put in a corner. If you're anything like me, I tend to push back against that a little bit more of like, no, I don't want anything to do with this story. I'm probably just going to forget it by the time I'm done. But when somebody tells a story and it comes from their heart and there's this genuineness about it, it becomes less about a lesson and actually more about just personal truth. And it starts to paint this picture for us where sometimes if a good storyteller is sharing, we can almost feel like we're right in the middle of it. A quote from a communications professor at the University of Buffalo that I really loved. Her name's Melanie Green. She says this. She said, "Solid information in any form is good, but it's not necessarily enough. A vivid, emotional story can give that extra push to make it feel more real or more important. If you look at the times somebody's beliefs have been changed, it's often because of a story that hits them in the heart." And I love the imagery of that because that is truly what happens. When somebody shares something or shares a story that paints this imagery, it can actually shift and shape the way we believe. It can change our own lives, it can change our families, and it can change the way that our culture actually moves. So I want to invite you to turn to Mark 5, because today we're talking about mission, and we want to find out the role that the power of story actually plays within that. And so I invite you to turn to Mark 5, and Dan's going to lead us through that.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, so we're going to be diving into Mark 5 this morning. And if you don't have your Bible, that's okay. It will be on the screen. And so up to this point, we have Jesus with his disciples. He's been doing a lot of teaching. He's been telling a lot of parables. And then he decides to leave the crowds and he gets into a boat. But he does so separately from his disciples. And there's this huge storm on the water. Jesus joins his disciples in the boat after and then calms the storm. It's just this whole thing. And then they get to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and that's where we're picking up. Verse 1. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained, hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. This is an incredibly powerful and thick story. So much going on. In our Western mindset, it messes with us. Right? It really does. We're not exactly sure what to think about it. Demons aren't typically a part of our everyday comings and goings, right? So this story really has a lot for us to chew on. So it starts out with Jesus and his disciples. They're in the boat. They get to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and they're not on the Jewish side anymore. They're in what the author Mark describes as the area of the Gerasenes. Now, it depends on what translation you read and the manuscripts that the scholars are working from here. They might mention a few different things, and so depending on which account you read, whether it's Matthew, Mark, or Luke, or what translation you read, you might actually have a different city name there or a different people group named there. And that's because, as Mark points out later, this is also known as the area of the Decapolis. That means there's 10 cities, Deca meaning 10, polis meaning city. And so it's an area of 10 cities that Jesus and his disciples arrive at. And one of the closer cities is the region of the Gerasenes. And they're not even in that city. Actually, some of the closest cities are still quite a long ways off. And so the area that Jesus arrives to is just the general area of the Gerasenes. Now, the whole Decapolis, it did have some Jewish people there, but it was predominantly a Gentile area. Okay, if you're unfamiliar with those terms, Jewish are the people of Israel, and Gentiles are not. Okay, that's the two classifications. If you are a Jewish person, you're either a Jew or you're not. Okay, and if you're not, you're called a Gentile. So this is a largely Gentile area that Jesus arrives in. The region of the Gerasenes. Verse 2 says, when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. Now, impure spirit is just kind of the introduction. As we find out, it's way more than just an impure spirit. Right? Impure spirit could refer to something ceremonially unclean as far as Jewish people go. When you worshiped a god, it was more about ceremonial things than it was about anything else. And so what they're identifying here is there's something that is not of God afflicting this man. This man lived in the tombs, verse 3, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained, hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Now, this is incredible. There's early Jewish teachings, and in those early Jewish teachings, they actually define what a crazy person is like. Somebody who is insane, what the definition of insanity is. And by the Jewish standards of insanity, this man checks all of those boxes. So by their contemporary standards, this man is incredibly mentally off and unwell. Now, they didn't have access or methodology for treating mental illness, so they did the best thing they could do, because this man was among them and he was causing such issues that the only thing they knew how to do was treat him the way that they could to isolate him. So what did they do? They chained him, they shackled him, and they isolated him. That's the idea behind the tombs. He's in a graveyard, he's alone, he was trying to hurt other people. Now he can really only be a harm to himself. The best medicine they had for this type of insanity was isolate him and tie him up. Pretty crazy, right? That means removal from his family. That means removal from society. Because of their knowledge, the best thing they could do is keep themselves safe. But as we see in the next verse, it doesn't work so well. The only pain that's now happening is now to himself. He couldn't hurt other people, but he is hurting himself. He breaks the chains apart, breaks the irons on his feet. Now this is intense. This is a person of incredible strength. It says no one was strong enough to subdue him. The best they could do is isolate him and chain him up. And then verse 5 says, night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. See, here's the reality that we're seeing in this person's life. We're seeing a picture into this impure spirit, as Mark calls it. Later on, we find out that he's possessed and there's a lot of demons in him. And what we learn first and foremost about the demonic is their primary goal is to mar the image of God in people. This is the primary goal. Jesus says they've come to steal and kill and destroy. And so the impure spirits in this man were operating in society according to that standard. He's trying to steal and kill and destroy. And they said, no more, you got to go off by yourself. We're going to chain you up. He would break the chains. And now being isolated from everybody else, he was turned inward. All of that unhealth, all of that demonic activity, all of the evil in him still needed to kill and steal and destroy. And now it's against himself. So he cries out among the dead in isolation, cutting himself. We have a picture of severe fallenness from the image of God. Lack of dignity, lack of community, lack of everything. He's just left to himself. I think if we actually pay attention, what we see, at least from our perspective, what we can see from the area of the Decapolis is a severe lack of compassion. They don't know what to do with him, so they just leave him alone. Go your way, leave us alone. But then Jesus enters the scene, and his entire life is changed. So as Jesus, verse 6, when he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." So Jesus gets out of the boat. This man has been watching. He's been alone. He's probably very aware of his surroundings. And for all we know, with this impure spirit in him, there could have been a spiritual reality going on that when Jesus, the Son of God, shows up on the scene, there's a spiritual sensitivity that the demonized man has, and he's aware of Jesus' presence. He's so aware of Jesus' presence, he comes out to meet Jesus, and while Jesus is still a ways off, the man falls on his knees in the presence of Jesus. Now, I think Hollywood has done a great disservice to us As it depicts the spiritual realm, we oftentimes see God and Satan as equal and opposite forces, and Satan is like this fun trickster, and God is like, don't do that, right? But they oppose each other, and they're equal and opposite forces. What we see here is something entirely different. In fact, scholar Alan Cole talks about the falling on the knees and the confession. What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me. Commentator Alan Cole says this about the demonic. They acknowledge the status of Jesus all unwillingly, confessing at once the vast gulf that existed between them and showing the searing effect that good has on evil. Let's read that again. They acknowledged the status of Jesus unwillingly, confessing at once the vast gulf that existed between them and showing the searing effect that good has on evil. So this demoniac, this demonized man was all alone, but when Jesus shows up, there's a forced confession, a forced submission, and Jesus hasn't done anything other than get out of the boat. In the demoniac's response, we see a couple of things about the spiritual realm. First, we see that the presence of God in the midst of the demons is so powerful and so other that there is nothing that they can do but fall down. Secondly, there's this confession out of the demoniac. What do you want with me, Son of the Most High God? You know, Jesus had been living among other people for quite some time. At this time, he's somewhere around 31 years of age, maybe 32 years of age. He spent a long time with people, and very few, if any, have confessed him to be the Son of God. They thought maybe he's a really good man, maybe he's a prophet, but the Son of God? Well, that's different. Yet out of this demonized man, there comes this confession. Not one of, I believe in you, Jesus, the Son of God, but what do you have to do with me? His confession shows that there is this vast separation between the evil of the impure spirits, the evil of the demons, and the goodness of Jesus. What in common do we have? We have nothing in common. Why are you here? And he falls down on his knees with this forced confession that Jesus is God. In fact, it's the first confession of Jesus as God in the Gospel of Mark. There's something about the presence of God in front of the demons that puts so much pressure on them that they have to do something. They have to submit. They have to do something. And so he falls on his knees, confesses Jesus as the Son of God, and pleads for mercy. What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me. Verse 8, for Jesus had said to him, come out of this man, you impure spirit. Now, here's something that's interesting to me as I've been reading through this. There's some realities of the demonic that we don't always pay attention to. Recently, having a conversation with somebody and just starting to talk about our experiences with deliverance ministry and all of those kinds of things, and how limited we are in our understanding. We're a very linear people, so we think, well, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, right? That's how we think. But that's not how the demonic world works. That's not how the spiritual world works. We think that if Jesus is on the scene and he says, go out of him, the demon just goes, right? That's what we understand. But that's not what happens. There are some things that we just don't have answers to, things that we just don't know about the spiritual realm and about demons that we get a little bit of a glimpse in here. All we hear now, what we read, is this demonized man falls at the feet of Jesus, confesses him as God, and says, don't torture me. Why? Because Jesus had been commanding the evil spirits to come out. But they didn't come out. They stayed. And they pleaded for mercy. Why would they plead for mercy? They plead for mercy because they think that if God is showing up, it's their time to be judged. It's their time to be judged. But it's not their time to be judged. It's their time to roam. It's their time to consume. It's their time to steal and kill and destroy. But maybe this demon thought, maybe if the Son of God is here, the judgment has come. And so they plead for mercy. Have mercy. As if God is going to have mercy on the demonic. And so they stay, and something interesting happens. You can read through the rest of the Gospels, and you can see that as Jesus approaches the demonic, time and time again, he commands them to go, and they just go. They go and they go. But here that doesn't happen. Here something else happens. Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit," but they beg for mercy. "Don't torture me." Verse 9, Jesus responds, then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" Now it's interesting because Jesus doesn't do that with the rest of the demons. Again, this is not an A equals B, B equals C, A equals C linear scenario. This is a different type of scenario. This is something where Jesus is paying attention and he understands that there are different types of demonic forces and something else is going on. This is not just an impure spirit. This is bigger than an impure spirit. So Jesus says, "What is your name?" The man's response is, "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." Again, scholar Alan Cole comments on this passage stating, in the Bible, name stands for nature. So the man was virtually asked to confess the nature of the evil by which he was enslaved. Names carried great weight. We've always, as we are naming our kids, we've always tried to pray about our kids' names. We got like 2 deep, and then the third one we're like, I don't know, Isla, right? We love it. It's a good name. Doesn't have as much meaning. But we paid attention. You know, Asa was our firstborn. It had come on the feet of a miscarriage. And so we thought, well, Lord, what are you doing? What do we name him? We thought, Asa. Asa means healer. His middle name is Shalom, healing peace. Right? Because it was God's sign of healing peace to us. And then we continued on. Ezra has significance for us. Names mean something. They've had significance for us, but that's not a new concept. They've always had significance. In fact, the ancient Near East culture believed that if you could have a deity's name, you would be able to manipulate because you would know their nature. If you knew the nature of a divine being, you could manipulate it, and if you could speak its name, you'd be able to command it. Scholars believe that's one reason God doesn't give his name, so that they don't think, so that the people of Israel don't think that they have any control over him. So he just speaks, I am. Names were significant. And so Jesus asks the demoniac his name, and he's expecting a response from the man, but the person is so demonized that the only thing that can be spoken is the exact opposite of the image of God. I am Legion, for we are many. It speaks to the severe state. The name represents the nature, and the only nature this man can speak of is the evil by which he is enslaved, as Cole points out. This man's state is very, very degraded. To say he's in a bad place is an understatement. My name is Legion, he replied, for we are many. And then he begs Jesus again and again to not send him out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding, verse 11, on the nearby hillside, and the demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank and into the lake where they were drowned. Now, this is one of the more troubling bits of the passage, actually. I mean, the whole thing should be a little bit unnerving. But this is one of the more troubling bits. Why did Jesus value the life of a person and seemingly devalue the life of 2,000 other created beings? Right? There should be something that there's a problem in our hearts with that. Just the devaluing of any life is not good. Do you want to know the really unsatisfying answer? We really don't know. We really don't know. The best we can do is understand a little bit more about the demonic, which is that it's not yet their time for judgment. Jesus said, I've come to preach repentance, the coming of the kingdom, to reveal God to people and his restoration in relationship, but it's not time for judgment. He will return for that, and at that time, something else will happen. So we know it's not the demons' time for judgment yet. They are still going to be here. Another thing we understand about the demon culture, as it were, is something that Jesus says. As he casts out a demon, he kind of describes the process. He says, you know, when a demon goes out of a person, it roams around. Why? Because it's not their time for judgment yet. They're simply displaced. They don't just disappear. And it roams around looking for a place to inhabit. Why? The best we can understand from 2,000 plus years of experience is that demons prefer embodiment versus disembodiment. So they roam around looking for something to inhabit. And when they don't find anything, they return to the man because he hasn't been filled with the Spirit of God yet, finding the place swept, put back in order, and empty. And the demon returns, bringing several other demons with it, and the state of the person is worse than before. Right, so what we understand when the demons say, don't cast us out of this area, let us go into the pigs, I think Jesus is looking at that and understanding, listen, they are going somewhere. They will go somewhere. They don't go nowhere, they go somewhere. Better the pigs than anyone else. And so they go into the pigs rush off because the demon's job is to steal and kill and destroy, and they never stop. The pigs rush down, they go into the water, they drown almost 2,000 pigs, and then the people around are just watching this. Could you imagine being one of the herdsmen? They really haven't been talked about up until this point. They're just kind of standing there. What were they saying? I don't know. Maybe they're just watching on the side like popcorn. Let's see how this goes. Not many people have had a good experience with this guy. Let's see what happens. All of a sudden, Jesus is talking to the man. They're like, this is going to be epic, and then the pigs go away. Not sure what just happened. Okay? Those tending the pigs, verse 14, ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside, and all the people went out to see what had happened. Of course they did. Of course they did. They have no clue what they just witnessed, but they go back and they describe the events to the people in the Decapolis, and as many as they're able to gather together, they go out and they look at what happened. And then I love this description. I love the description in verse 15. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed. Remember this, nobody could bind him, nobody could overpower him. He was incredibly powerful. The demonic in him was giving him almost supernatural strength, okay? They saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. They weren't sure what was going on, but they heard the description from the herdsman. They come and expect to see this demonized man, the one that had been plaguing them, the one that the best they could do is isolate him, get him out of there, try to tie him up, but even that wasn't working. As long as he stays in the tomb, we're good. But now they come out to see, and what do they see? They see this man dressed and in his right mind. Tangentially, that is what any true experience with Jesus is like for us. We go from where we were to dressed and in our right mind. We go from a state of chaos to a state of order, a state of chaos to a state of peace. That's what happens with this man. He was naked and in tombs, and now he's given dignity, he's given peace, and he's given clothing. Willingly keeping them on, and nobody even needs to try to tie him up. He's just sitting there, chill. That's what they come out to see. The last thing they were expecting to see, they see that. Their response was, they were afraid. Those who had seen it, verse 16, told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. So they come out, they see Jesus, they see the man who was demon-possessed that nobody could control. They're afraid, and they beg Jesus to leave. Why? Because after putting all the pieces together, they understand something. That person that was uncontrollable and stronger than anybody else in 10 cities now has been overcome, and the person is still there. Something more powerful than the demonized man with a legion of demons who was tearing chains apart was overcome by the word of one man, and they are terrified, and they ask that one man, Jesus, to leave. Now, we get hung up on the pigs sometime, but here's the true sad part of the story. They ask the one who could give them life to go away from them. Instead of turning toward Jesus and saying something greater, not just something more fearful, not just something more powerful, but something greater than the destructive nature of that person is among us. He's clothed in his right mind. We could have access to that person. Instead of having access to that person, they ask him to leave. Here's what we learn about God from this passage. As Jesus reveals the heart of the Father, Jesus doesn't stay where he's not welcome. Okay? Jesus doesn't stay where he's not welcome. And here's the sad part for us. I think sometimes we get so put off by something we hear or misunderstand about Jesus, or we're so terrified of what it means to submit to him, we ask Jesus to leave certain parts of our life. And Jesus doesn't stay where he's not welcome. He will never force you into anything. So Jesus leaves. And as he leaves, the man who was demonized, but is now dressed in his right mind, approaches Jesus. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Of course he did. I would too. I've never had any experience like that in my life. Jesus, would you let me come with you? But Jesus did not, in verse 19, Jesus did not let him, but said, go to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis, the 10 cities, how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. So naturally, the man wants to go with Jesus. He's willing to leave his own people. They've already rejected him, right? But now he's put back in his right mind. He's given dignity. He's able to go back to his family. He's able to go back to his people. He's able to participate in the rest of life. And so when he approaches Jesus, Jesus says, no, you can't come with me. What I want you to do is I want you to go back to your own people, and I want you to tell them everything that God has done for you. Here's what I think is going on. And it's something for us to grab hold of, is that Jesus was rejected. The people wouldn't receive Jesus' word, but they would receive this man's word. There were going to be a lot of people who would never approach Jesus out of fear or out of whatever, but they will talk to him, the demonized man, at least the previously known as the demonized man. They would accept his word. They would listen to his story. And as we see the description, as he goes back and he listens to Jesus, he goes back, he shares his story. People are amazed at it. They listen, they soak it in, they accept it, they receive it. Now, as we're talking about mission, as we're talking about what mission is, there's a substance that mission has. And we see it here in the story. There's a substance of mission, and here it is. The substance of mission is what Jesus has done for you. Okay, the substance of mission is what Jesus has done for you. And here's what I mean by that. As we look at this story, this man is commissioned into Jesus' own mission. He doesn't get to come along with Jesus, but he still gets to participate in the mission of Jesus. What is that mission? What is the work Jesus gives him? It's the story of what God has done. And it's not this massive thing. Jesus doesn't commission the man to go back and say, hey, I want you to go back and I want you to explain from the beginning of creation all the way up until now what a great guy I am. He says, no, just go back and tell what God has done for you. That's the good news right here. Go back and tell what God has done for you. And in the midst of being called into the mission of Jesus, the what of that mission is the simple story of what Jesus has done for him. And we get confused on this sometimes. If you've grown up in the church at all, or you've been in the church for any period of time, when we talk about mission, we're also oftentimes talking about a service opportunity. How do we feed people, or how do we clothe people, or how do we do this, or how do we do that? Those are all good things, and we should and we will do them. They're noble tasks. But the interesting thing to me is Jesus didn't call the man to go back to his hometown and say, I want you to go and I want you to start a ministry that feeds the people who haven't been fed. Still a good thing, still things we're going to do, but that's not what Jesus calls him to. That might be the how. That might be the access point for the story. But the true point of the mission of God is the work of God, and the work of God that he's doing in this man, and the work of God that he's doing in you. That's the what of mission. That's what mission truly is. It all points back to Jesus. Interestingly, as Jesus commissions the man to go and tell about all that God has done, we read the description from Mark that he goes back and speaks of everything Jesus has done. For Mark, there's no difference. For the demonized man, there's no difference. For us, there's no difference. The work Jesus is doing in your life right now, that is your what? That is the point of mission. That is what Jesus commissions us into the world to share. As Cody was saying, story is powerful, and we've never lived in more of a story-driven time. So we want to be able to share our stories about Jesus. If the what of mission is all about what Jesus has done in your life, how do we share those stories? Cody's going to be sharing just a few ways that we can share our story.
Yeah, 3 aspects of what this looks like that we want to talk about. Starts off, number 1, we need to understand the power of our story. So as Dan just shared, the story of the demonized man, the people were afraid of Jesus, right? The people were afraid, and Jesus then sends the man back into his town, and people were amazed. I think there's this reality, I've had experiences before where I've had friends that the topic of God, the topic of Jesus, topic even of church is one that is filled with, like, no thank you, I'd rather not. So they're not going to come with me to church. They probably won't even come with me to a youth group as I was younger or anything like that. However, the stories that I told of the things that God was doing in my life started to raise questions. And so we want to ask that. When we understand that the power of our story, we understand the power. We understand that lives can be changed and opportunities can be had outside of these walls. So I want you just to reflect for a minute to think about those people that you talk to. Maybe it's coworkers, maybe it's even your family who would never walk through those doors, but do listen to you when you share stories. So we need to pay attention to that. There is power in our stories, and those stories might actually make a difference in somebody's life. The second thing we want to focus on is finding the smaller stories for us. So for some of us, if you are new to following Jesus, maybe that's your conversion story. There's a lot of great power in that story of your life being flipped upside down from not knowing who Jesus is into following him and seeing a radical shift happen. But for some of us who've been following Jesus for a long time, I want to just throw this challenge out there that your most recent story should not be your conversion story. Because I believe that God is working in and through each and every one of us every single day and every single week. So we need to find those smaller stories of what that looks like. For this man, the example was his conversion story. He went from being this demonized man to being isolated, and now he has the story of all the things that God has done. So for you and I, what does that look like to find the smaller stories within our own life of how God has moved? Maybe that's even just a story of, I didn't know how I was going to pay for gas this week, but I put my hand in my pocket after laundry and I found a 20. Like, that's God's provision. That's still huge. It could be a story like that, or it could be something where I've been battling with this sickness, this illness, and somebody prayed over me, or I was praying with the Lord and he radically healed me. Those stories matter, and those stories start to open up our minds to something bigger than ourselves. For me this week, ever since I've known my wife, Paige, it's super sad, but when she naps, she wakes up usually feeling far worse than when she fell asleep. For me, I love naps. I could sleep all the time. It doesn't happen as much as I'd like, but that's okay. And so just as Paige was taking a nap 2 times this week, actually, I really felt like the Lord said, hey, I want you to pray for her. And I want you to pray that this would actually be a time of rest. And when she wakes up, she will feel better. And to my amazement, and maybe possibly to hers, both times she woke up, that's exactly what happened. Like, the beauty of what God can do when we press into who he is and how he wants to move. And to my knowledge, I don't know that that's ever been a reality for Paige, where she's been able to actually experience true rest in the form of a nap. Now, it may seem to me, because I love naps, it's super small, but for her, if that's something she's never experienced, that's literally life-changing. Now, naps can be an enjoyable thing. We can have more. We want to understand and find the smaller stories within our life of how God is moving. And the final thing we want to grab hold of today is we want to be authentic with those stories. So imagine what would have happened if the demonized man went back to the city and people said, "Oh my goodness, dude, I've heard you screaming. I've heard and seen the stories, heard the stories of what you've done to these chains, all these things, and now here you are fully clothed, you seem like you're in your right mind. How are you doing?" And what if he just responded and said, "Yeah, I've been worse," and then went on with his way? Like, Jesus actually gave him a command to go and share what he has done. And how often, I'm incredibly guilty, but how often when somebody says, "Hey, how are you doing?" or "How was your week?" do we just give them kind of a, "Yeah, it was good. Like, I'm doing good. I'll see you later," kind of a thing? What if we started viewing those as opportunities to share those small stories of what God has been doing in our life? What if we also get to share in this command, in this mission of sharing the things that Jesus is doing? And so when we have those opportunities, we want to take them. We want to be authentic to the opportunity of obedience that Jesus has given us to be able to share our stories, because we never know that what might happen when we take the opportunity to be authentic with our story and to share how that could change somebody's day, how that could change somebody's life, or even the questions that could bring up. And so I want to just invite you, just for a moment, to imagine with me what our own lives would look like if we lived this out, if we understood the power of our story, we started seeking and finding those smaller stories every day, and when we had the opportunity to share them, we shared them with authenticity in obedience. And imagine what this church could look like if we lived into that.
Your story is powerful. Not just the big story of everything God has done, but the story about what God is doing in your life now. What if we became a people who were storytellers? A storytelling people. That's what it means to be on God's mission, is to share those stories. So what if we became a storytelling people? Here's what I think would happen. I think that the hurt and the pain in the world would be overcome by the power of your story. I think that. I also think that the hope that you're experiencing in the small ways and what you've seen God do in your life will provide hope and encouragement to other people. That's what I think we'd see if we started being a storytelling people of what God is doing. But first we have to be able to answer the question, what has God been doing in my own life? As Cody said, hopefully that's not your conversion story if you've been in the church and saved for 30 years. Okay? Hopefully we're seeing God do something else. Now that doesn't mean that God is a genie that just gives us everything we want, but here's what I believe God is up to on mission in the world, is he is restoring things. And he's continuing to restore broken things until he returns and sets it to right for good. Where have you seen the restoration of your life in some way? Where have you seen hope or peace come to your life in response to God's movement? Those are your stories. Those are the stories that will change lives of people around us. Your story carries weight. They may not accept Jesus, but they might accept you. Let's pray.